Welcome to Shadow of Truth, and today is Thursday, June the 9th, 2016, and your hosts are Dave Kranzler from InvestmentResearchDynamics.com and Rory Hall from thedailycoin.org, and this is just a quick market update. Thank you all for being here. They want to call them fools and idiots, and what they do is being idiotic. It's anything but. I don't think that they're fools by any stretch of the imagination. They are evil genius, is what I see. That's kind of what's on my mind.
I think you're giving them too much credit.
I think that their marching orders at this point come through the IMF and the BIS, the Bank for International Settlement. And
right, there's no question about that. But no question about that. I would agree that they're trying to manage the monetary policy so that it can be used as a tool of wealth confiscation by the elitists. There's no question about that.
Yes.
But, I think what they do is they put a bunch of bumbling idiots on the FOMC, and Titus looked at this issue very closely, and he's researched it in depth. And he came to the conclusion that most of these guys that come out and, jawbone about raising interest rates, and then they come out and say that, we might have to wait another till the next meeting. They're just ivory tower academic meatheads. They're buried in their regression models. Yellen she's been groomed for this since the late 70s. She's been involved in the government and the Federal Reserve since the late 70s. So the guys like Yellen and Bernanke and Greenspan, they're basically puppets.
Yes.
And Titus, from what he's studied, and he's studied it as closely as anyone I've ever come across, has determined that their policy directives come from the research staff, and that's where the IMF and the BIS directives get filtered into. But for anyone who's got two brain cells to rub together and willing to look at the problem or look at the issue, it's clear that the upper 0.1% is essentially managing this system, the U.S. system, to confiscate as much wealth as possible.
Oh yeah, that is
the Federal
absolutely
Reserve is the tool for that.
Yes,
no question about it.
Do you think that it's a sacrificial appendage to the global system? I think that they'll just be, blown up or whatever. They'll just go away when the time is right, and they are inconsequential.
Yeah, it'll collapse. They'll collapse it along with the whole system. They're going to want to leave everything in rubble to try and bury what they've done. I don't know. No one knows how this thing's going to unfold. Even they don't. Even the guys running the show behind the wizard's curtain, they can't predict how this thing's going to unfold. At some point, it's going to become completely unpredictable. And that's where you get world wars breaking out. And that's what's always happened in history. And that's why I think this is how this is going to end. It's too conspiratorial that it's all tightly controlled and managed, like we were discussing yesterday with Jeff. Yeah, there probably are some people who are trying to draw Russia and China into the global, New World Order plan. But that's not going to happen.
No, I'm still kind of on the fence on that one. I'm not.
It's not going to happen. It's not part of human nature. The human nature is that one person wants to rule everything. Look at Caesar.
Yeah,
Caesar's a perfect example of that.
Oh, that's true.
He conquers Gaul and he goes back and he conquers Rome and he wants to rule the world. And that, ultimately, look how that ended for him. It took a lot longer for the Roman Empire to fall, but, he basically kicked off the whole process. So, Um, you're not going to have these, group heads of countries who want to share power. I mean, that's to me, that's part of the backbone of 1984, Orwell's 1984, where you basically had three geographic areas, that were at war with each other, continual war, perpetual war for perpetual peace. And that's the dynamic that is probably where this is headed if the nukes don't blow it all up before it gets to that point. I mean, you can kind of see where the alliances are forming already.
Yes.
China and Russia. And who knows? That could break apart and Europe goes with Russia and China gets the southern hemisphere and the U.S. is left with the north. I don't know how. No one knows.
Yeah.
It's once you get into a state of collapse, chaos sets in.
I just know that that if you go back and look at the history of the Federal Reserve, I mean, they have always done the exact wrong thing at the exact wrong time. Case in point is this recent, 25 basis points interest rate hike that they did back in December, and that was the exact wrong thing at the exact wrong time, and the outcome was as one would expect. It sends the Dow tumbling to its worst open in ever, I believe it was, and it just created all this havoc. Even though, if you listen to the mainstream media, you would have been told that everything's fine, everything's peachy, retail sales are awesome this holiday season, everything's great, and the Federal Reserve can do that. It's no problem. Next thing you know, everything's crashing and burning. So they do and that's what they did back that triggered the Great Depression, or that was one of the triggers. Is them doing the exact wrong thing at the exact wrong time.
Well, actually, it wasn't the interest rate hike in December that caused the Dow to tumble. In fact, it basically went laterally for a couple of weeks. It tumbled at the end of the year, and that to me was because of the actual fundamentals. I mean, 25 basis point rate hike was meaningless. It wasn't anything. I mean, if they were going to do the right thing, they would jack up interest rates to make the real negative rates at least neutral. And to do that, you probably have to take nominal interest rates up to about 8 or 9%. And the right thing to do would be to completely crash the system and cleanse it out and rebuild it. And so, I mean, and the Federal Reserve's been around for 100 years. So, and it was the third iteration of a central bank since this country's been around. And this country is a speck on the ass of history. So in terms of like looking at the Federal Reserve and saying, oh, well, this is what their deal is. I mean, who knows? It hasn't been around that long. Think about how long the Bank of England has been around.
Much longer. I understand. I understand that.
So I don't know. I think too much focus is put on the Federal Reserve, and that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to make everyone agonize over whether they're going to raise rates or not before every meeting, and that's the distraction that they're doing while they keep printing money. Just because they're not actually outright running the printing presses, they're printing money by credit creation.
Exactly.
So, and that's it was like I said in my blog post yesterday. Everyone looks at the stated money supply as it's stated on the Fed balance sheet, but that's not the supply of money. It's the money supply is a meaningless description. When they print money and give it to the banks and corporations to spend in the form of credit, that's the creation of money, because credit behaves like printed money until that credit is paid back. Well, guess what? They never pay it back. They just keep issuing more. When they increase credit, it may not increase the official tabulation of the money supply, but it effectively balloons the supply of money. It's a powerful effect because those reserves sitting on the bank balance sheets translates. They can lever that up 10 times
at least.
Well, no, that's your high-powered reserves. They can run that out 10 times. When you put $1 into a checking account, that gets lent out 9 more times. That's how the reserve system works.
Well, I thought that they were showing that Goldman Sachs and several others were at 35 or higher as far
Well,
as.
that's different. That also has to do with the derivatives and all that, and the
Gotcha.
derivatives are
Okay.
what the use of derivatives is what removes any sense of risk from this, or apparent sense of risk from the system, because you can take a lot more risk if you think you're covered by a counterparty, and that's where the problem is with the derivatives when the counterparties start to fall. And I think what the ECB and the Fed is doing right now is they're busy trying to keep counterparties from collapsing, and I think the biggest counterparty they're trying to keep from collapsing right now is Deutsche Bank. And again, this stuff is impossible to prove, but there's certainly plenty of circumstantial evidence.
There seems to be a lot of attention on Deutsche Bank.
Right. Well, and it's kind of faded from the news, though, recently. I mean, it hasn't been around in the news recently, but that doesn't mean the problem's still not there. They're out there trying to monetize this thing and keep. And Deutsche Bank's not the only counterparty that could collapse. I mean, J.P. Morgan. I mean, their balance sheet is as levered up as any bank out there. I mean, even Warren Buffett's Wells Fargo. And they're still sitting on a ton of home equity loans and a lot of them are not even performing. So anyway, and I think that's why the price of gold is doing what it's doing. The price of gold is doing this because it sniffed this out.
It's sniffing something out, that's for sure.
Right, and you've had all these yahoos out there pointing to the commitment of traders and pointing to where gold is versus the moving averages, and giving every reason in the book why they're going to smash the price of gold, and yet the price of gold has been as resilient as I've ever seen it since the bull market started.
Now, what about what about the miners? I mean, aren't they reflecting the same thing? I mean, as far as people turning to that paper market as far as perceived safety or the only way of generating any kind of income? Or
I don't think that, and that's a good point to bring up the miners, because that was something I was actually thinking about this morning. I mean, when they took gold down starting in early March or not March, was it early May? I'm sorry. When they started at the beginning of May, when all of a sudden these Fed guys started coming out saying they were going to jack rates, and that June was a live meeting, the Huey index. That's what I use as sort of representative of the mining stocks. Was right around where it is now, but gold was at 1,300. They took gold down to 1,200. They couldn't get it below 1,200, which shocked a lot of people. I thought they'd get it down to the 200-day moving average. They couldn't get it below 1,200. And now it's at 1,270, but the Huey is back to where it was when it was at 1,300. So the mining stocks are, because they're a leveraged play versus gold and silver, the mining stocks are telling us gold and silver are going a lot higher here.
Yeah,
because
it's
the smart money wants to get the most amount of leverage out of what they think is going to happen down the road in the market. And so that's why they're piling into the mining stocks. And the mining stocks are still historically cheap in relationship to where the price of gold and silver are. I mean, they're probably about where they were right now back in 2001 when I first got into this sector.
Yeah, and as John Embree, he said it was nothing more than a rounding error.
Exactly. That's exactly right. And that's why the mining stocks are doing what they're doing, and that's why the juniors are going crazy, because you have a whole host of junior mining companies out there that have proved gold and silver in the ground. Now, not all of that gold and silver can be economically converted into, not all of that ore can be economically converted into actual gold and silver. But to the extent that it can, if you're buying into these junior mining companies at $8, $9, $10 an ounce of gold in the ground, with gold at 1,200, right. So I mean, there's your upside leverage there. And I know that in 2010, sort of at the last peak, there were some acquisitions of junior mining companies that were going off at $800 to $1,000 an ounce per ounce of gold in the ground for these companies. Gold Corp made an acquisition, and that would probably mark the peak of the last run up. But now these acquisitions are going on at, say between $50 and $100 an ounce in the ground. So if we get back to the same valuations where we were in 2010, and I think we're going to go higher than that, because I think gold's going a lot higher. You're still looking at these junior mining stocks are trading at 10 cents on the dollar, even after what looks like a remarkable run up.
Yeah, which once again, I want to go back to what John Embry said. It's nothing more than a rounding error. I mean,
right.
And that's it.
That's exactly right.
As long as people can just remember that one thing, then what's happening with gold and silver right now is really nothing. As wonderful as it is and as beautiful as it looks, when you look at the chart and everything's all green, it's all great and moving in the way that we want it to move. It's nothing more than a rounding error. I mean, and which means that if things continue in this manner, oh my goodness, what is it going to look like a year from now or 2 years from now? It's like, oh my God, it makes my head spin.
Well, the other side of that waffle printed Engelhard bar of silver that you have, the other side of that is, if the whole system collapses, what's it going to look like? To me, that's a more interesting question. I mean, I agree with you. If they can manage to keep this thing up, floating with the system floating with printed money, yeah, these mining stocks are going way higher. But if the system collapses, you want to make sure you have plenty of physical gold and silver, because I don't know that you'll have access to any of your money at any custodian.
Well, even if you have the physical stock certificate in hand.
Well, what are you going to do? You're going to drive out to the mining company and the junior mining company and knock on their door and say, "Here's shares. Can you write me a check for these?"
Good question.
I don't know. I personally don't I don't think it's worthwhile taking delivery of the certs, because you don't know how the system's going to be put back together once it collapses. You're taking the certs because you're worried about custodial collapse, or you're worried about government confiscation of these companies or whatever. Well, the shares in your pocket aren't going to do you any good anyway. I keep the shares at the custodian because I want the liquidity if I need it. If you have the shares in your sock drawer and you decide you want to sell your mining company, you got to it's a pain in the butt to send the shares back in, and it takes time. I want instantaneous, or as instantaneous liquidity as possible.
Well, and that makes sense. Well, Dave, is there anything else we should bring to the floor?
I don't think so, other than just two real quick points of note here. I mean, more and more like people that you would put in some sort of form of respect in terms of their market prowess are coming out, and they're ultra bearish on the stock market. Now, I don't know if that means we climb a wall of worry here or if we roll over. I think the market's getting about ready to roll over. But gold had a very nice pop this morning.
Yes,
and it wasn't on that supposed terrorist event over in Israel, because that happened hours ago, and gold ran up several dollars way after that event occurred. So again, I think to me it's just an indication that gold is sniffing out what's going on behind the curtain, and it doesn't like what it sees, and that's why it's going higher.
That makes perfect sense to me. Gold is a thermometer of health of the monetary system, period. That's its job. So it's doing its job right now, and it's smelling something, like you said, it doesn't like. So
it's doing its job despite the presence of heavy intervention that's out there trying to prevent it from doing its job. That's what's the most interesting thing to me right now.
Excellent point. Dave, we might as well end it right there. Hopefully nothing big will happen over the weekend, and we'll just have our usual Monday fair, but if it does, we'll be there to report on it. So,
absolutely. Hope everyone has a good, safe, healthy summer weekend.
all right, dude. Talk to you soon.